what Ethan Marcotte did with responsive design was brilliant and gave us a way to talk about how to sort of scale this user interface. I was kind of coming at it from this, we're trying to build all of this stuff. How do we build these things in a way that are adaptable and again, create tabs that break down into accordions for these mobile screens and things like that. So the analogy I like to use is it's like when you go to the hardware store and you need to buy a door, you are going to see a couple doors. And those doors are going to open and close. There will be a frame of certain dimensions, right? There will be hinges on either the right or the left. There will be a little hole for where you put the doorknob, right? And that's what you buy at the store, right? If you want that door to be turquoise versus purple, or if you want to put matte black hardware on it versus brass hardware or brushed nickel or whatever material, knock yourself out, right? Like those are aesthetic decisions. Those do not impact the structure or the functionality of the door. When we limit ourselves and say, can I make this rectangle better than this automatic rectangle maker or whatever? It's like, my God, you are selling yourself short. It's and so this moment in time does feel like a real reckoning.
Hey, welcome back to this episode of Experience Design Podcast. I'm your host, Lee, and today I have a special guest, Brad Frost. You probably know about Brad because he's a leading expert in design systems, best known for his atomic design methodology. His work has profoundly shaped how we approach design systems and how we do product design in general. Anyways, in this session, we're going to discuss everything to do with atomic design origins, the systemic thinking behind design systems, where we headed with design tokens, with AI, with automation, and what the future is going to look like. It's a rich episode, so make sure to take some notes. And if you do enjoy it, make sure to share it with a friend, because that also certainly helps. Very curious, how did it start? Like, what was your journey like to everything, design and development?
It's been quite the journey. I began my university career as a music major, and that's what took me. I went to James Madison University in Virginia in the US, and I wanted to do music industry stuff. So I wanted to record and, do live sound and the music production end of things and the business side of music. That was kind of my thing. I didn't want to be in an orchestra or a jazz band. That's too proper for me. I just kind of, came from more lowly band beginnings and stuff like that. But that was my path, or so I thought. And then so in university, I learned that in order to be a music major, you needed to play an instrument. And that translated to you needed to hole yourself up into a practice room for hours upon hours upon hours. And you had a punch card that you would have to go to all of your friends' recitals. And it was this very strange thing just to have the title of music major, even though I was not a performance major. That was the requirement, right? And so I found myself kind of getting buried in that. So I talked to my advisor, and they said, well, there might be these other things. And one of those other things was this program called Media Arts and Design. That sounds fun. There was a computer in my high school art room that had Photoshop 4. I don't think that it was Photoshop 5 yet. I think they eventually got there. But so I spent my high school kind of tinkering around on that, but even just at home on MS Paint and all of that stuff. So that there was a program at university where there was, a Photoshop class. And at the time it was a Dreamweaver class and a Flash class.
Oh, yeah.
And, but also things like video production and, making DVD title screens. I remember that was a project and stuff like that. And so it was this kind of multifaceted major where you can do different things. So kind of journalists were in that world. My wife had a different concentration more in film and in like film production and stuff like that. So yeah, so I kind of like stumbled into it, but I was playing in a band, making my band's website, and that's what I was tinkering around with. And of course, things like MySpace were around there at the
Oh yeah.
time. So there was all of this kind of very organic web stuff. And then to have some dedicated courses on it was huge. It was like really, really huge. And then graduated several weeks before graduating. I was just talking with somebody who works with the guy who gave this book recommendation to me. I remember it like it was yesterday. Computer lab, these two students that had graduated a year or two prior had come back to tell us what it was like to be in the real world of as a working web designer developer. And the one guy, Matt Walkley, he said, uh, if you like this stuff, there's a book called Designing with Web Standards by Jeffrey Zeldman. And if you like this stuff, if you're interested in it, you should read it. It's good. And because we were in a computer lab, I went on to Amazon.com, which at that time was still just a bookstore, a book website, and ordered it, and then graduated, sat unemployed in my sister's apartment looking for jobs and reading this book that changed my life. And so eventually I got a gig, my first job as a web designer, and I got to put all of that stuff to use and figure it out kind of on the job. So that's what I
Yeah.
did.
Fascinating. But I think it's also, I mean, if you think about design systems, like systems is in the name, right? Like, so it's deeply systemic. Would it be fair to say that you had like an inclination for systems thinking, or like did it develop anyhow?
It's a really good question because my home life was not, I would not call that systemic or systematic. And it's like, there's a little bit chaotic, not like hoarder house or anything like that. Like we kept like a tidy house, but it's like my mom has just like piles of magazines and stuff. Like it's just not particularly, we weren't Scandinavian, we'll say, or orderly or Swiss or Japanese or like any. So there's no like cultural underpinnings of systems in my DNA, and so frankly, like I think a lot of it really emerged from just a real pragmatism. If you have two web pages, right? You have a home page and a contact page, just two flat HTML web pages or two Photoshop files, and you wanted to share the header from one thing to another, still to this day, that is very difficult. It involves introducing a bunch of extra technology. It involves introducing all sorts of stuff. It's this multi-step process to do this very simple thing, which is you have two web pages. You want the header to be the same across both of them. And so that's
Yeah.
really where this all came from. And as I kind of got further and further into web design and development, started building more and more websites, kind of start being introduced to these technologies. And at the time, backend languages like PHP, where you actually could include header.php, and there we go. Now we have our header shared across the board.
My favorite development language, by the way, PHP
Yeah,
is
it's awesome.
never fading.
I mean, it would take a lot to do away with PHP. It's just because something is old doesn't mean that it's bad. It often means that it's stable
Yeah.
and sturdy and reliable.
Yeah, no, definitely. And there has been this I wouldn't say trend, but the wipe coding with AI boom and people shipping straight to production has been also one of the themes I noticed in different social media networks. And it's interesting how some of those, like, even if you take something like old as PHP, seems to be getting like the next like revival of sorts or picking up the speed. I don't know if you noticed, but I feel like there is yeah, like I loved PHP purely, and not to go on a tangent, because it was quite modular, and it was so simply modular,
Yeah.
if that makes
No,
sense.
that's
If you would just take and hack WordPress site, you kind of just have this nesting, which is maybe has a bit of that design thinking in it, or sorry, design systems thinking in
yeah.
it too. Yeah.
I think you're onto something there, and that was like my introduction to PHP was WordPress and stuff. And when responsive design kind of became a thing, I kind of got into, at the time I was working at an agency. I got a job as a mobile web developer, and I'm like, I have no idea what that means, but this is kind of like late 2009. So the iPhone had come out, but the web hadn't yet really cracked that code, nor were they particularly like interested in that, right? It was still this thing. It got introduced, it was hanging out for a year, and just kind of floating, and there were a few people who had been working on the kind of pre-iPhone mobile web landscape, right? Things like BlackBerry browsers and all of that stuff. And I got the chance to like work on like Nike.com. That was like BlackBerry optimized. It's really fascinating.
Nice.
But it was kind of like through that lens that this kind of necessity of modularity became more important. Because as responsive design became a thing, it wasn't that like, oh, the homepage is hard to make responsive. It's no, it's just the nav, right? It's just that navigation. That's the tricky bit, right? So that's what kind of had me sort of picking this stuff apart and sort of saying, oh, okay, here's carousels, here's data tables, here's navigation patterns, here's breadcrumbs, here's just those
Mm.
types of things. And that's what kind of where I was at, because I was trying to crack this code, and we were working on, yeah, projects for Nike and Tiffany and Company and MasterCard and like these kind of brands that, here's this new thing called an iPad. We didn't even know it was called an iPad. It was just
Mm.
we had
Interesting.
Nike as a client, and so Nike was like, we're doing this thing, and here are the dimensions of this thing that we need to do, and kind of like the requirements, but we had no idea that it was for this brand new device that was coming out called the iPad. So it was really fascinating, but it definitely got into, wow, all of a sudden we've got iPhone.nike.com, we have iPad.nike.com, we have regular Nike.com, and then there is also M.Nike.com for all of the non iPhone mobile users. So it's just like, it's a mess, right? So back to
Yeah.
here's a homepage and a contact page. It's already hard to share that one component, that header component between the two. Now all of a sudden you're talking about managing four different websites that are all technically serving up the exact same thing. And so yeah, so this idea of like sort of systems thinking and stuff is really born from a real pragmatism of, it's like, well, this seems dumb to have to recreate this thing four times. I don't feel like it was particularly intellectual or anything like that. It was just a real, I'm trying to get things done, and this seems silly that we are having to
Yeah.
redo this stuff again.
To me, maybe there's another angle of why I think the frameworks or the thinking behind, for example, atomic design resonated so well too. It's not just that we kind of had more to design for or develop for, but also more people were involved as well. Whereas, right now, let's say it could be that, a few designers work on the same product, and then you have maybe 50 developers working on the same exact product
Yeah.
too. So there is so many minds to put. But when you were kind of offering atomic design, I guess, was there any like thinking behind that scaling? Because it almost like at that point I was thinking that the future is going to be like digitally native, and there's going to be much larger design and development teams and things of that nature. But what was your thinking behind it?
I don't know if I was anticipating a bunch of people working at a bigger scale. Although, yeah, in hindsight, of course, of course,
Mm.
of course, I'd like to say that I was right there with you, but you were actually looking ahead. Again, I feel like this stuff was really born of a real pragmatism. So at that time, so again, the landscape is the iPad had come out. You have, everybody else trying to launch their devices, right? The Kindle Fire and like all these things. We had like a whole like lab where it's just like these new things of all these different shapes and sizes, right? And so it really was just this matter of pragmatism of it's like there needs to be a way to reach all of these things, right? And
Mm.
what Ethan Marcotte did with responsive design was brilliant and gave us a way to talk about how to sort of scale this user interface. And here's these technologies and here's these concepts, which is awesome. And then I think that like I was kind of coming at it from this, we're trying to build all of this stuff. How do we build these things in a way that are, adaptable and again create tabs that break down into accordions for these mobile screens and things like that. And around that time, tools like Bootstrap and Foundation by Zerb was another one. And these things started to exist. And maybe even jQuery UI was beginning to be a thing at that time. And so these things existed, and it was like here's your widgets, right? Here's your alerts, here's your buttons, here's your things, right? Here's these, at the time calling them pattern libraries, right? Things like that. And here's this pattern library. You can make things out of that pattern library. I'm like, that makes perfect sense. But I felt that the story was too coarse, right? It's like,
Mm.
well, how exactly? Like sure, I could rummage around my box of Lego bricks and find the ones that I need, but like what I really want to do is be able to put a finer point on this and to be able to sort of in a more structured and hierarchical way say the little thing is included in the bigger thing, which is included in the bigger
Mm.
thing. And all of that was born from your favorite language, from PHP, right? Like, and that was my world. Like, I didn't come from a computer science background, but I knew by way of making WordPress sites that I can include my primary
Mm.
nav in my header partial and then include that header partial in my template, right? So that was the birth of all of this. And I created a tool called Pattern Lab using raw PHP includes as like the very first thing. And so this was like kind of like a precursor to Storybook where you had like a navigation across the top that you can navigate your patterns. And then inside of this iframe was the result, right? So I wanted to kind of keep it clean. So it's like you're able to navigate across these patterns, which again, now it's like, oh yeah, well, of course these tools exist, but at the time they didn't. And
Yeah.
so we were working on these client projects, which were WordPress sites. I created this thing, and I remember Jonathan Stark was the JavaScript developer working with us, and he's like, well, what do you call this thing? And I'm like, well, at the time, like, so I was building the tool and also building the concept of atomic design. I had atomic design in my head because of my high school chemistry class, and the teacher was he was like a stickler. He was a very like serious dude, but he was also a very warm guy. But he gave us like a packet of these chemical equations that we had to solve. And as a systems person, even if though I didn't know it at the time, I ripped through the entire worksheet. It was a big stacked stapled thing. And but I learned that the left side of the equation is all the same. So rather than having to sort of go row by row and do same then different, I could go columns and rip through like the first left half of the equation and get through it much faster. So I handed it in
Fascinating.
and
Yeah.
he was like, one of those like nobody's ever, done it this fast before, and it's because I was like, well, I'm just going to do it more efficiently. But it's stuck. Like it's stuck. Those chemical equations on like how two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom come together to form a water molecule, and right below that is hydrogen peroxide, and right below that is, and you're just doing it and you were drilling it and it's stuck, and it's stuck. So whenever I was trying to put that finer point on, here's patterns and you can make things out of that patterns, I kind of, I came back to that high
Mm.
school chemistry class, and then like, okay, the little things combine and to make bigger things, which then combine to make bigger things, which then combine to make ultimately everything in our known universe, which is just
Yeah,
still to this day bonkers. So, but
it is
but
fascinating.
it
Yeah.
but what's cool though about it is that it's like there is the idea and then the implementation of that idea in the form of this like weird PHP based tool that I ended up calling Pattern Lab. And again, back to Jonathan Stark asking me that question, I'm like, well, it's called atomic design, and he's like, yeah, but what's like this thing that we're building this website in? And I'm like, I don't know. And then eventually just kind of came up with like with Pattern Lab. So anyway, so yeah,
Fascinating.
so it was like the
Yeah.
concept and the tooling for it to implement the concept were born kind of at the same time.
Like there has been a lot of, I guess, work done for design patterns in like 70s and 80s, but like yourself, I think with atomic design, you've been like one of the most influential modern, I guess, web technologists. Because maybe you don't see it yourself that
I
way,
don't
but
see it that way myself.
I just thinking like what designers do right now with like Figma and how they use it and how they structure their work, and how front end and even full stack like backend developers are also structuring their work, and kind of the rise of both Figma and Storybook and a lot of other tools, and kind of working in interchange as well. Or if you look at all the, like, I think highly performant design systems out there,
Yeah.
they all are kind of based on atomic design principles. How does it feel?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would be very reluctant to take any credit for. It's like object oriented programming is a concept, like you said, from like the 70s, right? We have, all of the great identity and brand guidelines and all of that great like sort of systems work that all sort of happened. I think what's fascinating in retrospect is creating a buzzword that helps encapsulate a concept is really all I did. I think it's like kind of spelling it out
Hmm.
a little bit more, but it's like I
Yeah.
think that I have no doubt in my mind. I guess I'll say, like, kind of coming back to your question, is like that the industry would have gotten to pretty much the same spot without me saying anything. I think that the thing that I'm most satisfied about after it's all said and down is that the concept has proven to be quite durable and resilient. I think that it has stood the test of time to the point where I actually think that it's still very relevant, which is good. But also, I think that to be able to say atomic design, and for somebody who's not even kind of a part of that world, or they're not a technologist, or they're not a whatever, to just go, oh, okay, it's like, how like,
Hmm.
molecules and those are made of atoms, and you're like, oh yeah, yeah, okay, I get it. Like that's the
Yeah.
thing that I'll say that I'm proud of and satisfied with, is to be able to sort of take what's kind of otherwise maybe like a geeky or weird topic, and to make it kind of accessible for other people.
Yeah, that to me is quite important, especially in technology. And I have no doubt that like every other designer out there, and I'm talking just for like UXers as designers, had that in mind when they were learning design systems and how to structure their products, or their mock-ups, or kind of like prototypes. So like to me, it seems like it's quite important, to spell it out, or kind of like to tell a better narrative, so it's more approachable, because then that's how you get people to actually use it
That's it.
and validate it, so to
That's
speak.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to flip it slightly, I wonder, would you do anything different now if you would take it, like a time machine and go back in time? Would you have done anything different?
Yeah. I think that if I had a time machine, what we're doing right now is creating a course on design tokens, which is which was coined by my friend Gina Ann, who's been in design systems for longer than I have been, and has really run the gamut. She introduced that as kind of a concept in 2016, I believe, whereas Atomic Design was like 2013. So if I had a time machine, what I would do is kind of go back and include design tokens as a thing, as these kind of like subatomic bits, right? Where it's like here's your brand blue and here's your typeface, but those things, similar to electrons, protons, and neutrons, and all of the other subatomic
Mm,
elements out there, it's like those things do not themselves make up a hydrogen atom, for instance, right? It's like they need to be in the context of that atom in order for them to make sense, or in order for them to be operational, in order for them to do their jobs. And so I like that, because it's like when we think back to all of the brand books and stuff from the 60s and stuff like that, it's like, here's blue, right? Here's blue. And then you we need to see blue represented through an object, through an actual outcome. It's either this is on the page, this is applied to the side of a building or a billboard or an airplane fuselage or a coffee cup or something, right? It has to be applied, right? Like these, a
mm,
visual language needs to become whole only through its application in an object. And I think that that's the really fascinating thing about design tokens specifically, is that what we're able to do is we're able to sort of define a visual language, right? A theme. Here's color, here's typography, or here's border values, here's box shadows, here's animation, like all of the things that make up an experience. But those
mm,
things can't exist in a vacuum. You can't you could say them. You could say, here's our brand blue, or here's Starbucks green, or Coca-Cola red, or whatever, and we can picture it in our mind, but it's only when it's applied to those atoms, molecules, organisms, only applied to those components,
mm.
that it becomes real. And I think that that's super cool. And so yeah, so I'd say that that's really like the only thing. And I've now had 12 years of people emailing me with better alternatives, or taking these concepts and kind of applying them elsewhere. There are some really fascinating and interesting things. There's things like UI plus time, for instance, right? So people basically going through a flow, for instance. It's like you could technically like kind of expound upon it and build it up, but I'm kind of happy with it just kind of being a way
Yeah.
of taking any user interface, the one we're talking through right now, your bank's ATM, any other user interface that's out there, and you can kind of pick it apart and break it down in that way. And I
Yeah.
like, you can get clever with things, but like, with systems, it's like sometimes you could be too clever, or you introduce too much complexity into it, that you lose that elegant narrative, right, that we were talking about earlier. So it's
Yeah.
like you kind of want this like
This
nice
is,
tight.
because you're coming up with that course as well, which we can link in the notes for people to check out and pre-order as well. But in terms of, let's say, any design or development teams out there, like they might have already be using the atomic design principles.
Mhm.
What's the benefit of going subatomic ultimately?
Yeah.
Like, why should they really?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think that you're kind of alluding to it earlier, when you're talking about, I think the sheer scale of where the industry is going, where all of a sudden you have
Mm.
dozens of people working on products, you have just, quite frankly, we have so much more stuff, especially if people, like you're saying, are vibe coding and pushing to production. All of a sudden,
Yeah.
we're the exponential ramp is bananas, right? So we went from, you're a big company that has a website and you can kind of manage that, to all of a sudden you have two websites. You have your, public facing website, and then your intranet for your employees, and then they just kind of kept
Mm.
multiplying, right? But not just across the quantity of them, although it's that. You also have the different brands that your company supports. You have the different tech stacks, like, iOS, Android, all of the different flavors of JavaScript frameworks and CMSs, and
Mm.
every kind of target technology that you're trying to hit. You have, you know, dark mode being a thing, and different color modes. You have different languages.
Yeah.
You have different, like, it's just a lot. And we call them it's like the multi all the things organization, because usually it's like, oh, we're, people will get in touch and they'll be like, oh, we're a multi-brand company, or oh, we're a multi-platform company, or we're a multi-mode company. And it's like, it's multi all the things, right? So these
Yeah.
systems become really important, else you're going to get sliced up, drawn and quartered, right? We're already struggling to have our design systems meet the needs of these things, right? Just with an existing component library. But what gets hard, and one of, like, the biggest challenges and biggest sort of pitfalls we see a lot of design system teams fall into, is that they say, here's the design system, use it. And every product has their own unique considerations. They have their own needs, they have their own requirements, they're trying to meet their own users' needs. And those people know best. They know what their products need to do. The systems are there for these efficiencies, right? But
Mm.
when you have a single system that has a specific aesthetic that all of a sudden doesn't meet the needs of a specific customer, a specific product, it's kind of like game over for the design system, because they're going to go, well, we don't, I don't want my buttons to look like that. Our users don't like those buttons. And your
Yeah.
choices are, well, suck it up. You got to use it. And we've seen people take that route. Doesn't work very well, right? Or it's like, well, I guess design systems suck, and back to, just rebuilding our buttons every time. And it's like, well, no, hang on a sec. So the analogy I like to use is, it's like when you go to the hardware store and you need to buy a door, right? You are going to
Mm.
see a couple doors, and those doors are going to open and close. There will be a frame of certain dimensions, right? There will be hinges on either the right or the left. There will be a little hole for where you put the doorknob, right? And that's what you buy at the store, right? If you want that
Yeah.
door to be turquoise versus purple, or if you want to put matte black hardware on it versus brass hardware or brushed nickel or whatever material, knock yourself out, right? Like, those are aesthetic decisions. Those do not impact the structure or the functionality of the door, right? It is an aesthetic concern, right? So where this plays out, and why design tokens are so important, in addition to a solid component library, is that we're able to decouple the structural bits. And these are the things that we don't want people to have to reinvent again and again and again. We're able to separate that structure from the aesthetic, right? So we could create that one door, that one solid, sturdy door that's really great, and we could reuse that a million times. But then the individual teams can then sort of
Mm.
paint that door whatever they want, and or within reason, right? We could provide a system for how to apply the right aesthetic that's going to meet their product's needs. And so what that translates to is that we now have the opportunity for a single accordion component to live on the FAQ page of the marketing website's homepage, as well as the back office customer success dashboard page that's showing the breakdown of the numbers over the years, right? So by decoupling that structure and the aesthetic, you all of a sudden have this different axes of flexibility that gets you out of that game of adopt the design system and we'll ram it
Yeah.
down your throat, or design systems suck and we're just going to go back to the old fashioned way and just duplicate everything. And so this kind
Yeah.
of hits that sweet spot of kind of right in between, where it's like you get the aesthetic flexibility, which is what people want, with the
Yeah. I
power of
love
a
that
shared,
explanation.
with the power of the
Yeah.
shared uh, function and structure. Yeah.
I love the clarity as well of that, because I think, again, these things, I haven't met a team which had it like 100% done. And I'm sure that's why, I guess, yourself also trying to consult and help out like enterprises and bigger businesses too, because it's almost like never done too. You might reach a point where you can reproduce a lot of things, but as people change within organizations, or maybe some reorgs happen or new initiatives kick in, like you need that structure for sure. One thing, which is, by the way, maybe it's going to change a bit the theme of the things, but one question which I got from a community, because I shared with a few people that you're going to come on, and of course it sparked some excitement. But one of the questions was to do with what does Brad think of notion that design systems have ruined the otherwise creative and artisan web experiences. It's a typical thing that, okay, if we do everything with design systems, we can be creative, or we can push the boundaries. Like, what's
Yeah.
I'm sure you have had that asked before, but
Yeah, I probably doesn't come as a surprise that I think it's bullshit, right? It's like uh
yeah.
and and I think it's actually the reason why I think it's bullshit is, well, it's not bullshit, it's a red herring, it's bait, it's whatever, right? But back to what we are just discussing, right? I think that what we don't want to do is say it, in order for you to make a really cool custom mural on your front door of your house, right? You need to go out to the forest. You need to chop down a tree. You need to mill the wood. You need to sand it. You need to plane
Yeah.
it. You need to do all of this. You need to, forge the metal for the hinges and the door handle, right? It's like, that's an
Mm.
impressive feat. That is also just nonsense, right? Like that is not, it's not going to scale. That's for sure. So I think that the answer kind of is in that decoupling, understanding what's worth sharing and what's worth being more bespoke and what's more flexible, right? So again, I think that like one of the traps that we've seen a lot of design system teams fall into is that they have their carefully crafted button, right? That is that solid door frame, but it's also, and it comes in yellow, and then you're like, here, use this really solid door, and then people are going, well,
Mm.
I don't want yellow. I want something else, like you know my house that clashes, right? And it's like, no, but you
Yeah.
you need, trust me, like this door is really sturdy, lifetime warranty, solid as a rock. This was handcrafted, this was lovingly cared for, it is accessible, it meets all of those requirements, all of that stuff. It's like, yeah, but it's yellow, right? So it's that kind of coupling of those things. And so if we decouple those things and have those swim in their own lanes, you
Mm.
can pragmatically use the structure of those components to your heart's content. And it does make good sense to use those things if they exist. But it also doesn't necessarily mean that you need to stop there, or you can't, sort of have any sort of aesthetic flexibility. So I think that there's a number of things. So that's one angle of I think why it's a bit bullshit, because I think that there is nothing about design systems that say you need to have a boring design and boring outcome. There are a
Yeah.
lot of reasons
I
why
yeah.
those things exist, and I would look at, again, just what we've been talking about in this conversation: the diversity of
Yeah.
devices, the diversity of different things, the jobs we need our user interfaces to do, all kind of have like lent themselves, I think, to a pragmatism that's a little bit like, okay, yep, that's good enough, and we got bigger fish to fry. And if we were to do something really creative in this arena for either touchscreens or some other sort of
Hmm.
interesting thing, we're doing that at the expense of all the other things
Yeah.
that we have to do. So it's a balancing act of a lot of different considerations.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's also, myself, because I remember those MySpace days as well. That's where I learned my CSS, let's say. I think there was another tool before Dreamweaver. I think it was something by Microsoft. I can't recall the name, but it was what you see is what you get web design
yeah,
tool as well in development. That's as well where I kind of crafted my things. But I kind of get, because people, miss a bit, maybe, or people who have been here a minute, they miss those Wild West days where there are no rules, no accessibility standards. You wouldn't get sued for stuff like websites. Like, what are you even talking about?
yeah,
Or, or even businesses didn't really care much about efficiency
yeah,
and, kind of like, let's prototype this quick. Like, how could you actually do that without having something which is, as you say, scalable, right? So it's, to me, it's like that pragmatism comes into play. Like, how do you balance it, as you say, creativity within constraints? And I guess, why are we like, why do you develop those things in the first place? Because in reality, if you're on your own, you can just go and make whatever you
yeah,
want to make,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah.
that's another thing. But if you join a design team or development team, you probably going to build upon what you already have.
And I think that that's a really important point. And I think that those dynamics are more responsible for the results we're getting, more so than the existence of design systems as a concept. I think that you're exactly right. Once upon a time, there were no rules, there were no roads, there were no requirements, there were no whatever. It was like, we need a
Mm.
website. You down for it? You good? And then we figure it out, right? You figure it out on the fly, and we could do whatever we wanted. Now, I share everyone's, I think, nostalgia in that I do think that there's been a lot lost. I think that a lot of
Mm.
the ideals of the web, like the World Wide Web, as they are like stated, like you're talking about making a web for everyone, like accessibility is like baked right into the bedrock of the web, right? It's about sharing
Yeah.
our knowledge with the world. It's about, democratizing information. It's about like the best things, the best values that humanity has to offer: connecting people, collaboration, free and open bidirectional information. Like it's gorgeous. Like, and
Mm.
I've found it to be really important lately to say those ideals are still there, and they're just waiting for us to pick them up. I think that we've now had this arc in the world of technology that we're now living in, that we're now through the first round or two of kind of these successful digital products that are now, some of the most valuable companies on earth. And
Mm.
we've seen the downside of what happens when you connect the whole world together, and we do all of that. And I think that the answer isn't necessarily to shut the internet off. I don't think that we can at this point, but it
Yeah.
does, I think, this feeling that we're all feeling in this moment in time, which isn't a good one. Like, I don't think that anybody's like, we like this is so great and light and airy. It feels very kind of dire, and even in the face of all of like this new chapter with AI and stuff like that, there isn't that same just boundless idealism that's also coupled with like a responsibility there. I think like there's I think that the people who are very enthusiastic and nothing but excited about AI, sometimes the rose colored glasses are there
Mm,
in a way that to fail to recognize the real dangers of this thing that quite a few people I think see pretty clearly is
yeah.
uh is dangerous. It's dangerous to like there's a difference, and it'd be worth picking at. And I don't have like all the answers right now, but it's like if you look at the idealism of the early web and you look at the idealism around the current state of technology, which let's focus on AI because it's the thing, it's the predominant new trend. It's like, what's the difference in that idealism? And
Mm.
or are there differences? Or was I just young and naive around the web? And no doubt there were people that were pressing it against that.
Oh yeah.
But I do think that the web's origin story, coming from CERN, coming from researchers and scientists wanting to disseminate and share their knowledge more freely, and those kind of principles being baked into the bedrock of what became the web matter. And I think that like a lot of like the AI stuff in the conversation and the idealism around it, a lot of that idealism is sort of being expressed by people who have a very high stake, a lot of money to be
Mm,
made
definitely.
in this, right? So it
Yeah.
it, it feels it feels more like a this is good for my business if we all fully embrace AI into every aspect of our life, versus I feel like the web kind of was more about these kind of like higher ideals. I
Yeah.
don't know.
I do agree. I also feel like because we had that very strong platform of a web, Gen AI driven web or whatever shape or form it takes is like the real web 2.0.
Mm,
It's like a very out of control version of exponentially more complex tech, and the impact as such is amplified. But just like with the World Wide Web, there were super spreaders,
yeah,
kind of following on like virality theory of that it's not everybody. It's like there's gonna be selected few people who are these strong believers who just spread it like a virus to everyone
yeah,
else in the population, and then it kind of catches on. But from your perspective, in terms of maybe more specifically on like a I would say micro level, instead of like going global and all the different repercussions, in terms of I guess design systems, let's say if you take something like Cursor AI
mm-hmm.
as an environment, as an app, you can reference your code base, you can reference your CSS. It taps into all the different knowledge it scraped or stole, however you want to skin it, from like readily available code. It does know how to structure, let's say, like it does know how to produce some sort of apps of some sort of moderately good
Yeah.
thinking, just like a junior or maybe even a senior designer or developer would. But like, what is your kind of perception of that?
What's fascinating is that it opens the door to a lot of things. So the way I see it is it's like you kind of have the deliberate constraints of the design system coupled with the just totally could go anywhere, invent whatever thing power of generative AI. And so the design system kind of brings these helpful constraints into these things so
Mm,
that it's not just, yeah, either one of us can get AI to produce a website right the second we could hit the publish button,
yeah.
but can we actually hang our hat on it and say, is this any good? The answer is probably no. But if we were to say, okay, I want you to make this website using these sturdy ingredients that we know very well. And these are
Yeah.
our core infrastructure for how our organization designs and builds digital products. And I want you, AI, to use these materials to make new things out of them. What we've found in our work is that, yep, that works quite well. And what comes out the other
Yeah.
end is not just some weird prototype, but no, it's actually just a composition of these solid building materials that all kind of come together to create a result. So it's really fascinating because I think that it does a few things. I think that it emphasizes the importance of these systems in the first place. To be able to sort of like have something that you could really rely on is really, really important, right? To say this is good, this is not some like weird first draft of a component or whatever. Like these are things that we as an organization can say with a degree of confidence, AI or not, this stuff is good, this stuff is sound. So I think that that
Mm.
emphasizes the importance of the existence of these systems in the first place, and the hopefully that translates to the care
Yeah.
and ongoing investment in them. But then it also, I think, speaks to what do we do as designers and developers when we are not spending all of our life energy taking the building materials from the hardware store, from the warehouse, driving them to on site, and then sort of putting
Mm.
these things up, one at a time. Like what happens when we
Yeah.
have that process more automated, or whether assisted or even fully in some cases. Like what happens to those people that was their job description, right? And
Yeah.
and that's a very real concern. And whenever like I've given like guest lectures at like Carnegie Mellon University here in Pittsburgh, and these kids are about to enter the market, and and like that's their front of mind question right there is, like what do I do? Like what
Yeah.
like is this stuff actually going to take my job and whatever. And you touched on something that earlier whenever you're talking about design systems killing creativity, but those other factors that I think you put on the table, these things like, you know, efficiency and just growth and like just kind of capitalism, and like sort of thinking of this stuff really more as just this
Mm.
product, consumer product and stuff like that. It's when we view the world of digital design and development through that lens, that's where that more apples to apples comparison of, well, if an AI could do this faster than a human, then yeah, sure, we're going to go with like the faster, more
Yeah.
automated model. And so I think that this is like a real important moment in time, and kind of coming back to what we were talking about earlier about the broader ideals of the web, but also the broader ideals of just humanity writ large. I think that it depresses me to no end that we have a bunch of really talented souls on this planet who have thoughts, ideas, ambitions, hobbies, interests, families, relationships, a full life, right? Consciousness, morality, ethics, right? Judgment, discernment, critical thinking, right? When we limit ourselves and say, can I make this rectangle better than this
Mm.
rectangle, this automatic rectangle maker or whatever? It's like, my God, you are selling yourself short. It's like
Yeah.
and so this moment in time does feel like a real reckoning, but also a real opportunity, I think, for us all to collectively get back in touch with our humanity. This really is that existential moment of like, what am I doing here? What is my job? What are we actually doing as designers? And when we before, I feel like it was like we're keeping our hands busy by making the rectangles, and we're saying, look, I'm valuable, I'm doing work, I'm doing
Yeah.
hard work. When that goes away and we're forced to contemplate what it actually means to be a designer, what it actually means to be a technologist, what it actually means to be a problem solver. And when we allow ourselves the permission to reframe what it is we do to as more of a problem solver, then you get out of that strange battle with you versus this robot, right? It requires a real shift in individual attitudes. It requires a real shift in organizational attitudes. It requires a whole industry shift. But I think it's
Yeah.
necessary. I think it's really necessary in this moment.
But this might be an odd question, but I just, I love to ask my guests given AI topic. Let's say in the next 5 to 10 years, like what would you do or what will you do, you think? Like how is your role gonna adapt from what you're doing today? Do you still maybe imagine crafting things,
Yes.
because you like it, or do you think it's just gonna disappear entirely and you do something else?
No, I think that my mission in life is to make things and help people. And I do that and exercise that in many different ways. Some of those things are professional things, things that, earn money. Some of those things are just self expression,
Mm.
making things in that way. And helping people happens a number of ways as well, right? And so put that way, I use anything and everything available to me to do those things, right? It's a really, at a personal level, like personal journey level, sort of getting out of and kind of dismantling or reconsidering or uh, doing away with any form of box has been really important to me. Oh, Brad
Mm.
does design systems.
Yeah.
Brad's a web developer. Brad's a whatever. Or oh, over here are these is a box called a musician, and musicians do these types of activities. They have bands. They produce albums. They do all of these things, right? So what I've been doing is trying to yeah, dismantle and transcend any and all boxes.
Mm.
And so what that translates to come back to your question is it's like in 5 to 10 years, I can guarantee you I'm going to be making things and helping people. And what I
Mm.
use to do that is likely going to be whatever is available to me, right? And that's, I think, like the
Yeah.
gift of living in any moment in time, right? The people who
Yeah.
existed at, the birth of the wheel, the people that existed during the Industrial Revolution, the people that were working at the time when the collapsible tin tube came to existence that revolutionized how painting could be done, where all of a sudden you can take, Monet could go out on site rather than having these big unwieldy cans of oil paint, and all of a sudden you have this collapsible tin tube that allowed for this
Yeah.
brand new perspective, right? Or the creation of concrete or reinforced steel, any of those things, right? Like, so it's like the technology landscape that at any given time in history, right, provides us the materials for which to create, right? And I think I view myself, and again, it's taken a lot of work to get here, but it's like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, when I pick away at it, it's like, oh, that's what I am, right? So
Yeah.
I'm a creator. I think that anyone probably listening to your show, you can also say that as well, even if you don't,
Yeah.
even if you currently are defining your box as I'm a product designer who works in the pharmaceutical space or fintech space or whatever
Yeah.
boundary you do. You're thinking, you're making, you're putting things into the world, right? And so the materials that we can use and wield in order to accomplish that are always going to be changing, always going to be changing. And the pace is staggering. I mean, like it is really, you've alluded to it a couple times already in our conversation, but it's like, it's scary. Don't get me wrong. Like I am not all optimistic about this. I think that we are like orders of magnitude out of our depths. And I think that things can go very wrong. Like there's no guarantee
Yeah.
that that'll like all work out and it'll all be like rosy. But when it comes back to like the personal level, right? How I see this new crop of tools, I don't want to say like a unabashedly welcome thing, right? I've definitely experienced my stages of grief. I've experienced my own anxiety. My brother, who's a web developer working beside me, we've both been on the roller coaster of being like, oh God, what the hell does this mean for our livelihood, for our whatever? But I do
Yeah.
think that, again, it's like that process, and like anybody who's in that position that's like fretting that, like I encourage you to use this moment, that is a very anxiety inducing moment, to really reconnect with who you are as a person. Like
Mhm.
what who are you? What do you do? Why do you enjoy the things you enjoy doing? And
Yeah.
how can you redefine who it is that you are, so that you are not pitting yourself against this weird one-to-one thing about with a technology that that is interesting and useful in a lot of ways, but is no substitute for you in your entire human self. So it's a process, and it's important to work through it. I think that
Yeah.
I see different camps emerging. Right, there's either the get on board, the train's leaving the station, and like anybody that's like trying to sound any alarm bells on this is awful, and some luddite. And then there's the other people that are the proud luddites that are like, I will never ever use these things. And I think that it's really important for us as humans, and this is yet another conversation, another box to destroy, is any semblance of binaries or black and white thinking. See this
Hmm.
at a technology level, for AI, against AI, pick one.
Yeah.
And really any other issue in the world today. It is so
Yeah.
incredibly
It's
frustrating.
so
It's so frustrating.
so hard to shake off as well. I feel like it almost comes as a default to a lot of people too. And I mean, this is like a very small example, but like almost on a daily basis in my UX community, I get questions asked like, should I learn to code or should designers code? And to me, it's as maybe I'm in this luxurious position where I've been there, I've done it. I know a bit how to code, obviously very bad code to this day standards, but it's kind of like, why not? You
Yeah.
can literally pick up HTML and CSS in 2 weekends, maybe one weekend. Depends how keen you are, but there is like absolutely no point to limit yourself in learning anything. It doesn't have to be yes or no. It doesn't have to be like that binary kind of statement of I learn or I don't learn. It's like just learn. Like you can continuously, and you're gonna need to anyways continuously learn everything,
Yes.
be it AI, be it code, be it design systems or so. It's exposure to signals and how much you can recollect, how much you can match the patterns. But I always say to the community, it's just like, yeah, if you want it, if you're asking this question, you probably should.
Yeah.
And if it's not useful, you can learn something else. But it shouldn't be like, I'm a designer right now, I don't know if I should learn to
Yeah.
code.
Yeah.
Just that limbo is not serving
Yeah.
anyone, because why
You
not?
touched on something really important there, which is the like, you're asking that question. And I think that there's like two lenses to that question. There is the should I learn to code, and it's behind it is absolute dread or anxiety, or this pull, this almost this I must, or I'm obliged to, in order to stay relevant, in order to be
Mm,
whatever. right? And then there's the more curiosity led, should I learn to code? Which is a very
Yeah.
healthy attitude. And I think that it's important to have the discernment to distinguish the two. In my experience, getting asked that exact same question, I'm glad I'm not alone in getting that question a lot. But it's like, it's exactly what you said is, do you want to? Do you want to? And this is the thing. It's like I've really, these last number of years have not been particularly kind to me in the personal department. I've had to go through a lot of really like hard and traumatic things. And coming out the other end of that, you have such a better appreciation of just the finitude of everything,
Mm.
of the gift of this time we have in this moment. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you want to learn code and that's like something that you feel in you, that you're like, oh, maybe I should, like that curiosity, that draw, that pull, that magnetism, right? Follow it.
Yeah.
Follow it with all of you. And even if you're like, ah, that was, a wasted weekend, that's fine. That's a good lesson to learn, right? What is not good though is to feel that magnetism that is pulled at this weird extrinsic motivator, this
Mm.
this this kind of you should, that anxiety kind of gun to your head kind of thing, right? Because what that gets you is, fast forwarding 10, 15, 20 years in life, or like the question you asked earlier, going, what the hell did I just do with my life?
Yeah.
Like I didn't want to be doing that, but that's what I thought that I should be doing, right? So that like just knowing yourself again, like this is, it feels like a really urgent moment for people to reconnect with themselves. And I think
Yeah.
that there is this, it flies in the face of, I think, like what we're seeing in the industry right now, where there's like all of these designers and developers are struggling to get jobs. It's like a very turbulent time in the world. And so there's a lot of people, I think, making themselves a lot smaller to fit these
Mm.
perceived boxes. And
Yeah.
my hope for everyone is to, rather than shrink yourself and cut off all of these parts, to yourself, to try to fit this job sized box, get you hired, but also more importantly, like lead you to a more satisfied, fulfilling, and creative life. Like don't limit your, like, if you like playing music, like, again, for the longest time I'm like, well, I want to play music, but I can't because like I don't have a band, or I need to be working on this album. It's like just get whatever it
Just
is.
do it.
If it's around your crocheting, or and you're like, well, I don't
Yeah.
have my Etsy store. Or if you want to take photos, and you're like, oh, I don't have my like dedicated photos Instagram page, or I don't have my,
Mm.
I like playing video games, but I don't have my Twitch channel. Like whatever, like there's all of these pools, right? Like these extrinsic pools. And I think that for the designers in us, right? Good design is led by curiosity, right? And so I think that we need to kind of
Mm.
direct that designer curiosity at ourselves a lot more than
Yeah.
we currently do.
Designers are often quite crap in designing their lives or solving their problems, and it's kind of like a doctor who's giving like the best advice, but they might not be that easily following it,
I mean, it's
that type
it's
of thing.
human
But
nature, Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
But I think it's a great takeaway to whoever is listening, to just reflect of the why it's important to you, what you want to do, and yeah, don't stop learning, I think, as
yeah.
well, in
And
terms of all the
there's like
different things.
infinite things to be curious and excited and
Yeah.
enthusiastic about. Like it's like at no point, I think, in human history has there been such an abundance of
Yeah.
of things, just the accessibility of techno,
Yeah.
I'm
Can
sitting here
you?
with like
Yeah.
these gizmos in front of me, and like
Yeah.
all of these things. It's like each one of those each little gizmo on my
Yeah.
desk is like a career path if I wanted it to be. It's crazy.
Exactly. Can you imagine the days where, let's say, if you were to want to learn PHP today, you could like I would probably again this is me kind of being too cocky and stuff, but I feel like I could learn PHP if I would have to in just half a year and be proficient at it, or maybe even less because you have AI tools and everything in between. But Brad, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, it has been a really good chat. I hope you also enjoyed it. Where can people find more about you? Where could we send them to?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I had a great conversation. Thank you so much for this, V. This is really good, and I think like really, really important to dig into these things. So I really appreciate
Hmm.
the opportunity. If you want to listen to more of my ramblings and things like that, bradfrost.com. I've had a blog there for going on 20 years now, which is really crazy. But yeah, in addition to my website, we have this design tokens course where we talk about the door and how to structure all of that architecture at designtokenscourse.com. So that's how I'm feeding my daughter. So I would appreciate you taking a look at it. But it's been really
Yeah,
fun, and a lot of people from all over the world who have been, you know, wrestling with creating these design token systems. We're creating like this really cool little community over there. So it's been a lot of fun. So yeah, check it out.
awesome.
Yeah.
Nice one. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.